Thank you, Grace. Everyone give her a hand. Awesome. So let's do our memory verse and then we'll get into the lesson, all right? All right, we'll do reference, then the verse, and then the reference, all right? Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. And one more time, reference, verse, reference. Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. Awesome. Okay, so last week we learned about the triumphal entry. That's what they call it. This is Jesus entering into the city of Jerusalem. And all the people think Jesus is going to rescue them and make their lives better and deliver them from the oppressive rulers over them. But Jesus has a different mission. Jesus is more concerned about their soul and saving their soul than he is their earthly success. And so now we're in Mark chapter 12, so we're skipping a couple stories. And so my challenge to you this week is to read the rest of Mark 11 because it's super interesting and they're really good stories and I don't want you to miss out on them. Jesus curses a fig tree and then it dies and it has this really cool meaning that represents judgment. And then there's a bunch of businesses in the temple and Jesus drives them out with a whip. So it's pretty intense. I don't want you to miss it. So make sure this week, write it down. Read Mark chapter 11. Write it, type it in your phone, and then put your phone away, unless it's your Bible. All of these stories are leading us to this parable of the tenants. Does anyone know what a tenant is? Anybody? I'll open it up to leaders too. Any takers?
When you don't own a property, you rent from somebody, and when you rent, you're called a tenant.
Yeah. So when you're renting a property, you're called a tenant. I don't know if you heard her, but that's right. So this is the parable of the people who are renting a property. That's the easy way to say it. Remember, a parable is not a true story, but it teaches us a true lesson. So Jesus is teaching a lesson with this story. And we're going to walk through it one or two verses at a time. So, Mark chapter 12, verse 1. And he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it, and dug a pit for the winepress, and built a tower, and leased it to tenants, and went into another country. Okay, so a vineyard is usually meant to grow a lot of grapes. And they turn the grapes into wine, and then they sell the wine. So he's starting, this rich guy, he's building a vineyard to start a business. And then he rents it out to people, and it's like this big thing where everyone kind of benefits from it. The workers, they work there, they live there. So everyone kind of gets something from the business. It's really cool how the rich man set it up. And he goes away. Verse 2. When the season came, he sent a servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. So this makes sense. He starts the business. He's going to make some money off of it. He made the vineyard, so he can do that. It's not wrong for him to do that because he set this whole place up. He's the guy who runs it. He comes back to make a profit out of it. Verse 3. And they took him, and this is the servant that he sent, and they took him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again he sent to them another servant, and they struck him on the head and treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and him they killed. And so with many others, some they beat, some they killed. And I think this is crazy because he gives them a good deal. Like, he has this business, they're working, and it looks like he sets things up well for them, but they're not happy with it. So when he comes back to receive money or a profit from his business, they're beating the servants. They end up killing the servants. And here's what I'm going to let you on at this point in the lesson. In other parts of the Bible in the Old Testament, the people of Israel were called a vineyard. That's how God described them. And so when Jesus is speaking in Jerusalem, To the Jews, when he entered the city and now he's telling them the story, they know he's talking about them. When he says this vineyard, they know he's talking about us. And the religious leaders, the Pharisees, these are like the people at the temple, people who are similar to me in a lot of ways. They are like the caretakers, right? They're the caretakers of the vineyard. Like they're the caretakers of the people of Israel, right? The people of Israel are like a vineyard, and then the religious leaders are like caretakers to them. So when it says he entrusted the vineyard to tenants, the Pharisees and the temple and religious leaders, they hear this and think the Lord entrusted the people of Israel to the religious leaders here. So try to catch on to what he's talking about here. And then throughout the Old Testament, God would send prophets or his servants. He would send prophets to his people, and they persecuted the prophets. And that is just like this story here, where he sent a servant, and they persecuted him, and then they killed the one, and then they persecuted the other, and they killed the other. And then we go throughout all of these books right here with all of these prophets. God sent Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah. He was beaten, imprisoned. He was thrown into a well, they think. God sent Isaiah. Trigger warning here. He was probably sawn in two. They killed him. God sent Elijah. He ran away from an evil king and queen who tried to kill him. And there are so many others. There are all these prophets that God sent, and they beat them and they killed them. You see the connection here between the story and the story of Israel? So God sends servants to his people, his vineyard, and they killed his servants. And in the same way, the tenants killed the rich man's servants. God sends servants to his chosen people, and they kill God's servants too. We'll pick back up in verse 6, all right? So this is the owner. He still had one other, a beloved son. Finally, he sent him to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir." So he's like the one that gets the inheritance. "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. I'm going to stop there. So the rich man sends his servants. They beat and they kill his servants. And he says, "I'm going to send my son that I love." And they kill his son. And notice why they killed him too. It's in verse 7. They said, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." It's like they have this idea, well, if the son gets the vineyard, if the son's dead, then we'll get it instead. I don't know where they got that idea, but that was their reasoning. If we kill him, it will all belong to us. We can receive the inheritance. It'll be ours. They wanted to be the ruler of the vineyard. They wanted to be their own ruler of their own place. So they thought killing the son would give them the power of the vineyard, just like the Pharisees suspected that killing Jesus would give them greater religious power, would give them more power over the people. We'll start back up in verse 8. "And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do?" I'm pausing there. What will the owner of the vineyard, what would you do? Because you're reading this and people say God's wrath is unreasonable. In this situation, what would you do? You send your servants that you love, and then you send your beloved son. What would you do if they killed and beat all of them? If you were the owner? And then, as a last resort, you send your favorite person in the world and they kill that person too. What would you do? Back at verse 9. "The owner, he will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others." So So God, like we were talking about, blesses the Israelites in the Old Testament and sends servants to guide them. He sets this whole thing up for success for them. And then God sends prophets, and they kill and they persecute one after another of the prophets. Then God sends his son, Jesus, to them. Just like in the story when the rich man sent his beloved son. But what's crazy about this is, and this is like a historical text too. Like, this is kind of crazy. Jesus hadn't died yet when he tells this story. I want you, like, we read it later on and we're like, oh yeah, it's just like Jesus died. He had not died yet. So he knows in advance. Jesus tells this story knowing what they're going to do next. God sent his son, and they're going to kill him too. And they do kill him just a few days later. This is like we were talked about last week. This story is the last days before Jesus was killed. And so then the Bible says something that was a little bit like unexpected for me. After this whole story, verse 10, he says, "Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." So a cornerstone, just to kind of like help you understand if you don't know. So when you're like building a building, you've got the corner. And at the bottom of the corner, that's like where everything is held up. So you've got all these stones, and they're all sitting on top of this really important cornerstone. And it's saying, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. So imagine the builders are like building, and they're like, nope, that one doesn't work. And then like they come to another spot. That stone doesn't work. They keep rejecting it. They don't want it. And then it comes time to put in the most important stone at the very end, and they're like, that one fits perfectly. That's the one. And so Jesus is the rejected one who turns out to be the one they were waiting for. Jesus is the stone that they rejected, ends up being the perfect one that holds everything together. So Jesus, the one they all rejected, the one that they kill in the end, he's the one who came to save them. He's the one that all things, including their salvation, like them being saved, all things rely on him. All things are held together from him, just like that stone. All things are held together by this foundation, which is Jesus. The stone that nobody wanted. And that's the foundation. And that's the one they rejected and killed. He's the one. And so that's why verse 9 says, what will he do? He will destroy the tenants, but then he gives the vineyard to others. I want you to see something with that. It doesn't just say he will destroy the tenants. It says he will give the vineyard to others. So that doesn't mean the story's over. He says he will entrust the vineyard to others. Notice that in verse 7. Or not in verse 9. But in verse 7, I want to go back a little bit. Look at verse 7 again. I really want to talk about why they wanted to kill the son. They wanted the inheritance for themselves. So they wanted the vineyard. They wanted to be the owner. If we take it like to its furthest extreme, it's like they wanted to be God over their own life. So this is the person that is talking about who rejects Jesus because they want to be their own God. And usually like that happens all the time today. But we don't usually say it like that. We usually just say like, I'd rather like make my own decisions, or I'd rather just figure things out on my own for now, or like go my own way, or I don't want anyone kind of controlling me. That's the person it's talking about there. It's funny because a lot of the people who are listening to this parable and hearing that, they believe in God. They believe in like the God of the Old Testament. They loved the religion, but their power was more important to them than Jesus was. Even like their power in how things were run in their religion was more important to them than Jesus was. So how we could think about this now, like our autonomy, like the way we see ourselves, the things that we have, the way we like to run things, that's more important to me than Jesus is. That's what the tenants are like. They want to be Lord over their own life. And so he gives the vineyard to others, to people who live their lives, or not live, I'd say who give their lives to God rather than insisting that they are God over their own life. And there's a really great example. It's probably on the next page, verse 41. I wanted to give you, this is a true story. This isn't a parable. This is kind of a practical example of what the opposite of the tenants looks like, all right? So Mark 12, verse 41. And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which makes a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." So this is a woman who doesn't have a lot to offer, but her life belongs to God. And we can see that so clearly here. Christians aren't always that cool. Because we're people that are like, we need God. Like, we're not super independent. Like, we need God. We are people who say, "God, I don't have much to give. I don't have anything to give." That's the person that God is looking for. The tenants, I want you to see like the difference between the two here. The tenants wanted their own glory. But a follower of Christ says, "I don't have anything of my own that's impressive. I am a sinner. I need forgiveness. I need God. I need him to help me." And that's what this woman does. Instead of looking for her own power and glory, she just gives of everything she has, even though she doesn't have anything. Her life is his. And I also should say, she gave everything she had, not perfectly, but willingly. If you were at church, you kind of heard this today when we talked about love. Like, we can't love perfectly, but we can love truly. In the same way, we're not perfect when we come to God with humble hearts. We give our lives to God, not perfectly, but willingly. So in the parable of the tenants, we learn about people who reject Jesus because they want power, because they want to be Lord over their own life. But as believers, we are the ones who, like, we take the crown off of our head that we've been, like, trying to pretend like we're king, and we lay it at Jesus' feet and say, "Jesus, you are Lord." So that's one thing. Remember that. The other thing I want to go back to is this idea of Jesus being the cornerstone. Jesus is the foundation of what we believe. So no Jesus, no Christianity. Like, he is the foundation. So to say Jesus is Lord and King is to say he is the foundation. He is the cornerstone, meaning everything we believe is held together by this person. Like, if he's not there, it all crumbles. Like, if you want to try, like, Christian ethics, like the stuff that we do, like, a lot of people believe in Christian ethics. Like, we just live our lives as good people, but without Jesus, it doesn't work. So this is why he's called the cornerstone. Everything we believe is built on him. That's how significant he is, and we have absolutely no Christianity at all. We have no religion here that's true if Jesus is not in it. He is the foundation. And he is the only reason we can be saved. No Jesus, no salvation. No Jesus, we're not saved. And that's why he's saying he is the cornerstone. When we should have died, he stepped in and said, "I will die instead." He took the blame, and that's a gift, and it's free. And so the question we have here is with the tenants is, will we reject the cornerstone or will we accept him as the king who holds all things together and has authority over our lives? That's the question we end with, and that's the question I have for you. And then at the end, verse 12, it said, they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he told the parable against them. So they left him and went away. And so that's where we leave off until next week as we get closer to the death of Jesus. But for now, that's the question. Jesus is the foundation behind everything we believe. Will we accept him as king, or will we reject him?